Hi, I'm Rena, and welcome to a bonus episode of Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We, and What Are We Doing? This is not one of our regularly scheduled weekly episodes. It's an extra that we're throwing out there with some bits that we cut from episode 21, Gandhi, and episode 22, The Duchess. This is some of the material that we deemed to be irrelevant host banter, or cut for time, or because it was digressive or repetitive. Some of this will sound without context, like we are having a conversation in non sequiturs. So if this is your first time listening to Biopic, a podcast story, you should probably download one of our regular episodes or our introductory episode to get a better sense of what we're all about. I would especially recommend anything from episode 10 onwards because it took us a while to figure out the sound quality. Enjoy, and thank you for spending some of your time with us. I was thinking about it, and I suppose our segue from Reagan, episode 20, into Gandhi, episode 21, is hagiography, but I think. And gosh, I don't know if I should remind me when we get to this scene at the ashram to talk about how my indignation on behalf of Mrs. Gandhi is my overwhelming emotional response to this movie.
I mean, she's the reason there's no fault divorce. She did not sign up for this. And I want to share with you the background of my renting this movie off of Amazon, which, because I was planning to watch it in installments like I did in high school, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to buy this movie.
Okay. Others, and seriously, white South Africans are way more racist than the British. OMG.
Oh my God, they just stopped being outwardly racist like 25 minutes ago.
Yeah. So what it comes down to here is that white South Africans make every single Brit look like a freedom rider in Mississippi. Like, speaking of choice dialogue, one of my favorite speeches in all of film is Rutger Hauer's speech in Blade Runner, where toward the end, where he talks about all of the amazing things that he's seen. And he says, and then when I die, all of this will just go blip. I'm paraphrasing. And I saw Blade Runner once about 20 years ago, but that moment stays with me. And it's something that I think of as like a metaphor for the miracle of life and death and the wonder and horror of it all, that we accumulate all these incredible moments in our heads, all the things we see in our accumulated consciousness. And then when we die, it all goes blip. And it's like a whoa and a kick in the guts every time I think of it.
Yeah. I have been thinking about that every night lately. So I've been thinking about that scene and that speech and what it means so often lately, and it's so sad. And yet here we are talking about Gandhi. And back to Gandhi.
It is a holier than thou movie, and it reminds me of why I would rather drop dead this minute than ever have anything to do with any form of spiritual or religious practice.
And here's the thing is like, and it is a good reminder of sort of the character that it takes and how it has been sort of co-opted in our world by cis hetero white men who belong to a certain party in this country as a way to try and tell people to stop making them uncomfortable when they're trying to take on a movement. You know, like anytime anyone gets upset about something, we're like, look at Dr. King, he was nonviolent. And it's like, do you know anything about Martin Luther King? Like, do you know anything about him? Like, he did all this stuff. Like, he let people hit him. And that is incredibly, like, that takes way more character than I have. He went to prison a bunch of times. Like, stop co-opting his name as a reason to tell people to be quiet. Same with this, like, where it feels almost like this movie is saying, like, look, we fixed this. And we fixed racism. And this guy did it for us because he was so peaceful. It's super metal to let, like to do this and to tolerate it and to experience it. I was kind of angry at the docile way he was portrayed, because there is like a warrior spirit that goes into embracing this kind of movement and living it. Sorry.
I think this is an example of how the Brits fucked up being an empire. If we compare the Brits to the Romans, I want to point out Rome was in Britain for nearly twice as long as the US has been a country. Again, Rome was in Britain for nearly twice as long as the US has been a country. The Romans extended citizenship further and further through the empire. And I remember years ago reading a thing about how the British, by making colonists sort of second-class citizens, wound up being an empire for less time in each place. And if they'd had any brains, they would have given the colonists reps in parliament. But Britain at the time has something called rotten boroughs, which are places that have like 3 people living in them but get a rep. So sort of like Wyoming, but worse. And again, they do the same, like they kept doing this thing, and that's why the British Empire overall lasts less than, why it doesn't have that much lasting power, because they insist on making people living in their extended empire second-class citizens.
I mean, everything's going great is the answer.
Well, I loathe anti-materialists because I get joy out of procuring and looking at, and I don't need to own it, I love the museum, beautiful things. And when you're saying, oh, things don't make you happy, it's like, don't you feel anything inside? It's like, no, not only have you've just left me with nothing.
I don't disagree with some of the fundamentals that he talked about in terms of like, yeah, like I do think that like things don't matter much if you're like deeply like unhappy to begin with. Like it's not gonna fix the stuff that you need to deal with. And I think there's a lot that's admirable about him. There's a lot that's weird about him that they really didn't get into in this movie.
If you're just tuning in now and didn't hear the Bessie episode, the Queen Latifah allusions are because Sarah felt she overpraised Queen Latifah in the episode on Bessie, leaving no room for actors like Meryl Streep. So now she refers to that whenever she feels like she's about to overpraise or underpraise an actor.
To be fair, Queen Latifah gives a fine performance in that film. I think I just went to 11 in a way that like I'm reminded of like a couple of choice cultural moments around Gandhi, which is the Inside the Actors Studio spoof on SNL where Will Ferrell played James Lipton, and he told Charles Nelson Riley that he was so pure of spirit he made Gandhi look like a pedophile. But it's like I took it like all the way there, where I didn't leave a lot of room for like Sir Ben Kingsley.
I can tell you in advance this is going to get a 10 for costuming from me. I know we don't discuss it, but it's sort of something you could have guessed. It's very much arena film, I think.
Yeah.
Because we know I love a costume drama.
There's no scumbags in it, so that's how we know it's not a Sarah movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like a scumbag.
I read Amanda Foreman's book. It must have been over a decade ago, but I'll probably reskim it because there's some fascinating stories in there about 18th century aristocratic gambling addiction, and how one of the politicians, Charles James Fox, who she campaigned for despite being unable to vote herself, was this huge gambling addict who would stay up for days gambling and then drink a pot of coffee, run into Parliament, make a big speech, and then go gamble again. It's one of these things where, like, I guess it's the opposite of Gandhi, where the addictions that eat at people of great aptitude are rather fascinating. And not only that, but the nobility. So if you held title as Lord so-and-so, you couldn't sit in the House of Commons, you sat in the House of Lords. You could be Prime Minister if everybody agreed on you to vote you in as Prime Minister, but your second son could sit in the House of Commons, even if he's a lord, which was the case with Winston Churchill's daddy, Lord Randolph Churchill. Or you could have, like, a cousin or a friend of the family who you made sure went to Parliament. It's cited in the book that, like, the Duke of Devonshire controlled, like, 7 or 10 people could control up to a dozen people in Parliament. So a rotten borough with 3 people in it sent someone to Parliament, while all the people sitting around in London renting, of which London would become the first city to top 1 million in population since ancient Rome around this time, could not. Like, do you see how uneven this is? This is like Wyoming.
I was about to say,
this is like Wyoming to the infinite.
Yeah, I was like, this is, so like South Dakota might qualify as a rotten borough.
Oh, but at least South Dakota has, like,
but
I don't know.
I'm just saying, like, the amount of power that they have is not representative, is not representative of the number of people that they have. And there's a fundamental unfairness to that in terms of the way the desires of the country overall are represented in a parliamentary system or in a Congress, because, like, every vote in Wyoming is worth 2 times what it's worth in New York, where the smart people live.
Oh, yes. So it takes a while to implement, and extending universal manhood suffrage past property owners, because there's that scene where Fox says moderately free, as in, we're not talking about letting every man vote. And let me look up when Vindication of the Rights of Women is written.
I mean, at least they got rid of it, because we are still clinging to that stuff because of people like Ted Cruz and, like, just all of, like, you know, like, just monstrous people who have undue influence in our country because they come from, like, these weird little places that have outsized amounts of power, because we are also a fundamentally unfair country in the same way, where, I mean, we haven't quite gone down the road of landowners, but in a way we have, when you think about, like, the, you know, I mean, Citizens United is just as much garbage. So yeah, anyway, go on.
In this case, we are talking about a bunch of raging gambling addicts. And yes, one of my problems with this film is that it didn't show that, and it's so fascinating. This is not my jam. The gambling addiction. The 4 addictions I absolutely do not get are gambling, cutting porn, and making yourself puke. I understand that there's some kind of adrenaline charge to gambling, but the idea of risking just losing money makes me sick and nervous. If I'm going to run through money while attempting to quiet the shrieking abyss within, I'd rather just shop for status symbols of a status that I do not in fact possess. At least then I have something to show for it. Nonetheless, we are talking about gambling addicts. And a word on the costumes, which are amazing.
Yes.
And I checked one of my go-to frock flicks, one of my frock flick go-tos, recycledmoviecostumes.com. And sure enough, a number of the costumes in The Duchess are rentals that show up again and again in films and series set in the 18th century. I'm looking at you, Belle, and Harlots. But many costumes created specifically for The Duchess have since appeared in other films. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure they'd think, and I've had this thought too, gosh, it's so much easier to just put on a corset to keep your waist tiny than all of what we do, getting all sweaty and disgusting at the gym.
Yes, but also like I don't know if you've ever had the delight of wearing a corset socks. It's very uncomfortable.
You're just not used to it, Sarah. Your rib cage hasn't been destroyed enough.
You're correct. You're correct. But also just like it's a very disorienting feeling to be in a corset, because it's I'm not a fan. I'm not saying we shouldn't go back to it in some ways. Like I like the formality. I know you are a huge fan of dressing formally. I think that, you know, that they serve a purpose. But also like they're very uncomfortable. And because like all of this has to go places, it doesn't just confine, like it also like has to like go places. It's very uncomfortable, but it looks amazing. And it looks amazing in this movie.
Yeah, we're about to have the same thing I cut where I defend corsets despite having... I think I wore one once. I tried one on in the dressing room at Patricia Fields, and I remember this because I heard the entirety of the Purple Rain soundtrack while getting the thing on and off. And I think I didn't get it because I was disappointed that I couldn't get my waist tiny enough in it. And I'd hoped that,
No, I mean, I'm not saying like that. I'm not saying that they're bad or good in except expressing the concern that they are incredibly uncomfortable to wear.
What I was saying is I'm sure there's stuff that we do that they think how dreadful that is. We have XYZ that makes far more sense.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, you can tie a lot of fashion styling to, you know, like the patriarchal notion of making women smaller and quieter and, you know, forcing them to focus on their appearances rather than like their character, you know, whether it is like, you know, heroin chic and the way that flappers all had to be very, very, very thin, or foot binding or corsets or what have you. Like you preoccupy women with their own body and having them suffer in pain to meet a certain ideal. And they're not going to be as concerned about voting.
When they married, she was 16, he was 24, and they show like all of his passion and affection is for his dogs. I think he's one of these people who nowadays would be... He'd give his estate over to like 50 different dogs that were on the youth list for biting children and say, we don't deserve dogs. He's a cold fish, and there's things that both he and with Bess Foster, I don't know if it's studied or not, but that make me wonder if he's mildly spectrum-y.
I mean,
and he's a dull man.
Yeah, and he says as much too. And yeah, so that's the start of their relationship. And, you know, my main takeaway from the opening here is like, don't get married when you're a teenager, and maybe don't ever get married because you just change a lot. I think like part of the message here is like, make your own damn money, get your own land, and don't let yourself be sucked up by the patriarchy because they're just going to ruin you. I don't know.
So his own parents died when he was quite young, but at the point that they're married, in real life, he was 24. They're married on their way from, and because her own parents had been a love match and her father had been someone who was a still waters run deep kind of guy. So she's hoping that that's what's up with the Duke, and that could be that thing where the thing where women are supposedly drawn to men who remind them of their dads. But she has a girl, and it's the 1780s, so at least another 300 years before a daughter is universally as valued as a son and has the exact same chances.
Where is this magical land where this is happening?
I said 300 and not 200 for a reason, Sarah.
Oh, okay. I was like, are you talking about about now, because it's still not to be. There is absolutely no time in history where it's been awesome to be female.
1780 plus 300 is 2080. We won't see it.
So yeah, like when people are unearthing this podcast from underneath the rubble of history and women finally have power, yes, 300 years later, everything is awesome.
He needed a young, pretty, well-tempered virgin and a woman worldly enough to say, okay, this is the deal, like he seems to expect. Problem is, she wouldn't be...
Yeah, she wasn't willing to just play the role.
Anyone worldly enough to sign on for the deal isn't going to be that virginal, aristocratic child bride, is his problem.
And, you know, like, the facts remain. No one stays a child bride forever. Like,
no.
Women age. They age. It's a thing. It happens.
Bess's father, the 4th Earl of Bristol, had succeeded unexpectedly to the title on the death of his 2 elder brothers without legitimate heirs. And her father is a huge spendthrift, but one of her ancestors was the first acknowledged practicing bisexual in Britain, which is what Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was alluding to.
That was an amazing quote, by the way.
Yeah, but what she's alluding to here is that people in that family have a reputation for
yeah, they sound wild.
That people in that, yeah,
it's like that there wasn't the mafia to come and break her legs at the time, but you know, gambling does fall into that like very high risk behavior category, and I think that, you know, I think that there's just I'm a broken record. There's more that they could have done.
There have been shady people and organized crime. Just remember, we all know the world's oldest profession, so someone to market them probably rose up quite quickly afterwards. It's always been there. It's just not Cosa Nostra.
Imagine trying to be a prostitute in this time period when you can't own land. How can you even sell your body? Someone has to do it for you.
Well, a woman could own property unless she got married, because then it immediately became her husband's.
Ugh, I hate it here.
If you watch Harlots, like, the madams do own or rent the... Like, you do see the madams occasionally owning the house that they sell their girls out of.
I have not watched Harlots. I have to watch that at some point.
You will see some of the costumes from this again.
Where, like, I understood why things weren't in there. Doesn't make me happy that they weren't, though. Like, to your point, like throughout this, though, too, like beyond even the omission, though, there were some accuracy issues in terms of like what people were up to. Gambling.
Well, her gambling so greatly affected everyone, and that it was part of the reaction, and you just see her being sad. You don't see that she was a full, like, these people, that she and Fox, her pal, and at one point that we don't go into here, she was one of his many conquests, that they fit the archetype of the brilliant addict. Often the things they left out were key in this unhappiness that they were portraying. Yeah, I dinged it harder on something I'd say on omission than we usually do as a rule, because of the role that those things they omitted played.
I mean, I think you make a good point, though, in terms of like how it affected her. You know, Gray is kind of presented as an intellectual compatriot when really it sounds like he was more a running buddy. They were out there partying together and gambling together and living that way together, on top of like both being really smart. It's an element of her character that feels essential and feels like it was taken out of this to make her a little bit more tolerable and palatable.
I love Foreman's bio so much. Despite having had this like smattering of an education that young ladies were given to fit them for society, she was like smarter than this. She wrote novels and poetry and plays. She had a fascinating correspondence. And they do allude to this when she has that first conversation where it's like, oh, I can tell we're going to be friends with Fox, where she says something about political speeches that I wish I'd written down, that her analysis of what's wrong with political speech making reminded me a lot of George Orwell on political language, which is an essay that I've referred to for writing tips throughout since I first read it in high school. Yes. Oh, other things. The Whigs were for equal rights for Catholics. And something we didn't see is there were anti-Catholic riots where the Duke and his buddies all had to, like, get troops together to, like, fight these anti-Catholic rioters.
I mean, is it wrong for me to say, as someone who was raised Catholic, that maybe, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that.
For separation of church and state and not persecuting.
I'm very pro separation of church and state, and I get why people are weirded out by the Catholics.
But just as an example of how crazy this was, this riot invades Parliament. By an unlucky chance, while the Lords were debating the Duke of Richmond's proposals, Lord George Gordon, a mentally unbalanced Protestant fanatic, chose to march on Parliament at the head of a large mob. He carried with him a petition from the Protestant Association, a sectarian body opposed to giving legal rights to Catholics. This mob, intoxicated by drink and whipped up by a crazed demagogue, was more dangerous than the usual overexcited rabble. The crowd blocked all the entrances to Parliament, while Lord George Gordon stormed into the Commons. The MPs fell silent at his entrance and sat spellbound as he harangued them on the evils of popery. He then rushed to do the same in the Lords. In between speeches, he ran to a window to shout to the crowd outside, fearing for their lives. MPs made a dash for the stairs, and as they tried to leave the house, they were punched and kicked by the marchers. The Lords followed suit, ignominiously leaving the older peers, such as the 80-year-old Lord Mansfield, to fend for themselves. The Duke of Devonshire's carriage was stopped by the mob until he agreed to shout, "No popery." By nightfall, the protest had turned into a riot. Thieves and looters joined in as bands of club-wielding rioters burned down foreign chapels and attacked the shops and houses of known Catholics. At first, Georgiana did not realize the danger facing the capital. But by the next day, June 6th, the mob was on the point of taking over the city. Ministers and opposition alike hurriedly sent their wives and children out of town and prepared to mount a defense on the streets. But the magistrates were nowhere to be seen, and following a misunderstanding over which authority had the power to mandate the use of firearms against civilians, there were no troops in place. The rioting continued unchecked. The mob sacked Newgate Prison and burned down the King's Bench, that's a court. They exploded the distilleries at Holborn so that the streets were flooded with spirits, and the water supply to Lincoln's Inn Fields became alcoholic. Lord John Cavendish condemned the Lord Mayor's cowardice in standing by while London burned to the ground. He had good reason. The mob had targeted the houses of prominent Whigs because of the party's support for religious toleration. Edmund Burke's house was surrounded, but he managed to fend them off. Sir George Savile was less fortunate and narrowly escaped being burned to death. Poor Lord Mansfield watched as rioters looted his house and destroyed his celebrated library. The Whig grandees mounted a round-the-clock defense of their houses. Georgiana wrote on June 7th, forgetting her birthday in the midst of the chaos. I want that.
I mean,
that is fascinating.
The Brits rode the Catholics hard. I think they may continue to, but like even in Northern Ireland, they were able to maintain that, like, the housing property voting rules where you got one vote per owner. Or per household, and it made, it made it so that, like, it was electoral college-esque stuff. So because of household sizes and representation. So there you go.
Did you know that 458 Londoners were killed or seriously wounded in anti-Catholic riots in the 1770s? Because I didn't, and this movie doesn't either.
I didn't. And I don't want to watch Catholics get murdered. I want to be clear about that. But it is an interesting, like, crazy bananas thing that was going on that we didn't see.
Yeah, or gosh, things in this like soapy thing. I'm sorry, I know it's late. Sheridan was, or our friend Richard Brinsley Sheridan, yes, an incorrigible drinker, womanizer, and plotter. He embodied the best and worst of the circle. He was brilliant yet lazy, kind-hearted and yet remiss over honoring his debts to the point of dishonesty. Sheridan disliked paying his creditors on the grounds that paying only encourages them. He once shook his head at the sight of a friend settling his account, saying, "What a waste."
I mean, yeah,
These
if
people
you
are crazy, irresponsible, but totally like charming rogues and gorgeously dressed.
pay your debts, all it's going to do is make people continue to think that you'll pay your debts. I get it.
Yeah. Yikes, God, I'm going to cut so much, but I bet we get this down to 50 minutes of actual content.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
But I love chattering with you. Like
I know, me too.
We used to only hang out every 3 months and say we need to do this more, and that was like 18 years of our friendship.
Yeah, not anymore.
Nope. Now we spend hours together virtually every week.
Yes, and next we have to watch Pride of the Yankees.
I'm going to cry, and that one is... I bet that one gets a 9.
That is going to... yes, that is going to make me cry. Stupid baseball makes me stupid, like, sentimental. I hate sports. And yet, you know, like I was watching because the late, great James Earl Jones passed last week. And I found that so devastating. And I think it's like, it's a war crime that he didn't win an Academy Award for Field of Dreams, for his performance in that.
Sarah, look up what beat James Earl Jones. What won that year?
That was what?
He would have been Best Supporting.
Yes, for sure. So Field of Dreams is 89. So this would be 1990 Academy Awards.
Speaking of which, next week will be our first appearance from Walter Brennan. The OG character actor had a 60-year career and still the only man to win Best Supporting Actor 3 times. Okay,
so Best Supporting Actor. Denzel Washington won for Glory.
Okay, that's fair.
That's fair. Other nominees, here's where there's a couple in here that are just dogs. Danny Aiello from Do the Right Thing. I will accept that.
Agreed.
Although, like, I'm also kind of like literally any black actor from that movie. No? Okay. But then we get into like darkness here. Dan Aykroyd for Driving Miss Daisy.
Fuck me gently with a chainsaw, Heather.
There's things that I would love to see Dan Aykroyd be nominated for awards for. That's not it. Marlon Brando in A Dry White Season. Like, this was like the era of Marlon Brando showing up and trolling people because he decided he hated acting and everything associated with it at some point and just showed up to make fun of it. Like, that movie, like, he's barely in it and it's not a good performance. And then Martin Landau for Crimes and Misdemeanors, which he was very good in that film. But yeah, there's room here for one of these guys to step out and for space to be made for James Earl Jones. That's a shame that he wasn't nominated.
Again, going back to what we said last week in Gandhi about
awards bait.
Yeah, about how the films we genuinely love and remember don't get nominated, and the people who deserved it for that will get nominated for something later on that has more prestige points that nobody cared about.
I still cannot believe the amazing circularity of Spike Lee making Do the Right Thing and Driving Miss Daisy sweeping the awards, and then making Black Klansman and Green Book sweeping the awards.
Nothing fucking changes, dude.
Like, that, it's so insane to me because, like, I don't know if you've seen Black Klansman.
I have. It's amazing.
Spike Lee is not always on, but he is always provocative. And that was a movie that I felt like was his Goodfellas, where he was combining so many elements of things that shouldn't work, but they did work.
But
And
Klansman is fantastic.
I mean, Harry Belafonte in that movie, Jesus.
I'm actually happy that this didn't make Second Opinion, because I love this story that I read in Foreman's biography so much that I don't want to hear people denigrating the subject matter and saying, why should we care about this lady? So I'm happy that it came up short. So other stuff you should watch instead. First off, you should read Amanda Foreman's biography, because it is a rich look at a fascinating world that this barely touched on in ways that were effective, but it wasn't what I fell in love with. Barry Lyndon. Well, she's written other books. It's okay. There's like this genre of biographer that writes like upper middle brow pop biographies of aristocratic women of the past. The Tudors, when you go back another century, they get a ton of attention, and I've kind of put off watching Tudor anything because I watch so many historical dramas that it's like, ugh, the Tudors, everyone's seen it 1,000 times, right?
Yes.
Everyone's seen like a dozen Anne Boleyn movies. Why bother? Or at least I have. Or it's felt like it.
There's a lot of Anne Boleyn content out there.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of like, ugh, this again when anything about the Tudors comes out.
Yeah.
I'm more partial to the Wars of the Roses, but that hasn't been like, well, no, there's the Stars dramas based on Philippa Gregory novels.
Yeah, like I feel like why it's like the Joker. I'm like, why do we keep making movies about Anne Boleyn?
Because people are dumb, and that's why we have so many Anne Boleyn things and not an Eleanor of Aquitaine or a Queen Matilda movie.
Like there's nothing new to bring to that story.
Anne Boleyn, because there's plenty new to bring to finally giving Matilda her own movie.
If you have something new to say about it, go ahead, make your movie, write your book. But it's like, what else is there to say about those circumstances? That
there is nothing new to say. And on that, remember Margaret First, one of my OGs of historical costume design, there is a dress that she made for Princess Mary Tudor to wear in Anne of 1,000 Days 50 or 60 years ago, that has been recycled in practically every production about the Tudors since, and worn again by either the actress playing Elizabeth I or the actress playing Mary I at some point in a childhood scene. That's how overdone this story is, that they even recycle the same dress and nobody remembers on the same character.
Yeah, let's retire. Let's retire stories about her.
Yeah, okay, let's have some Wars of the Roses and some let's have more Angevins and Plantagenets, please.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Indeed. I'm like, that sounded like words. I know a little bit about them now because of Beckett. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag, all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you email that, you will get Sarah and not me. You will never get me because I am bad at this stuff. And Sarah is good at it.
I'm really nice sometimes.
I know nothing relevant about pop culture. I'm sure we'd have like 1,000 listens per episode if we decided to make one more Kardashians thing.
No, I can't do that though, because I find them.
Remember our idea for eventually doing on Patreon that like for a certain amount of money they can get a bonus where I'm forced to watch their choice of an episode of reality TV and react to it?
Yes, I still want that to happen.
Yeah, in about 5 years.
I want to make you watch Below Deck.
What is Below Deck?
It's a show about rich people riding around on expensive boats and the staff that runs the boats.
That sounds perfectly dreadful.
This wasn't a hagiography.
No, this was a thoughtful portrayal of complicated people that could have been amazing.
I know nothing about Lou Gehrig except he gave that speech and he got the disease that happened to be named after him, which is just a tragic irony.
Yeah, and Cal Ripken never would have broken his record if he had not gotten that disease.
Well, and Cal Ripken never would have broken his record if they had had the game the night that he got into a fight and was injured with. He got into a fight with Kevin Costner because Kevin Costner was hooking up with Cal Ripken's wife. Yes.
Wait, how is Field of Dreams guy crossing over with the guy who broke Lou Gehrig's record?
Kevin Costner has had sex with most moms, either in their fantasies or so, like boomer moms have all had sexual fantasies about or actual sex with Kevin Costner. That is my theory. I am not taking questions on it.
Okay. Yeah.
Comments section on that theory is closed, but I do believe like every woman in the 90s wanted to do it with Kevin Costner, and that maybe allegedly included Cal Ripken's wife, and Cal Ripken maybe allegedly got into a physical fight with Kevin Costner over that, and he was injured and they had to cancel a game so that he could break the record. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Speaking of playing dangerous games.
God, I guess I'm thinking of my, like, the Duchess prestige drama, because there's so many people that, like George III's son and heir, George IV, is a total wastrel, and just, like, awful, and he was always hanging out with them, too, and he owed a ton of debt and had a terrible marriage, or that... I guess I don't that the Spencers are related to the Churchills, who are the Dukes of Marlborough, who Winston Churchill comes from. There are just so many people, or like ancestors of people we know, who pop up in Foreman. Who, yeah, at some point I really want to do that biopics we wish would happen thing, because
we gotta
there's
do that,
an HBO series called Tippecanoe that I dream of in my head.
I'm into it.
Well, that was the 11th edition of Irrelevant Host Banter. If you liked the show, please leave Biopic, a podcast story, a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic, a podcast story. We also have accounts on Threads and Blue Sky. Please check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Have an excellent weekend, and we hope that you'll listen in when our regular episode drops on Tuesday.